And it's BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. Firstly, hello everybody and welcome to the show. On Thursdays here on Black Box Online Radio, I am doing the live streams. And in this episode, I will be talking about the Long Island serial killer and the suspicious death of Shannan Gilbert. But first, I have to give a shout out to longtime BBOR listener Midnight Ventures, who requested some more mood lighting for Black Box Online Radio. Now, let's see if I can do this without destroying it. There we go. There we go. What do you guys think? Yay or nay? Trying to get a little bit more color on this side and color on this side. And I also would like to give a big shout out to Classic Chevy Cat, who requested today's episode. Specifically, can you do a direct response to Nancy Grace's bombshell episode on Shannan Gilbert and the Long Island serial killer? And if anybody has an idea for a future episode, you can put your request in the comment section down below. This is an episode that was requested by one of the listeners. So firstly, I would like to say that I've done several different episodes on the Long Island serial killer starting back in 2010. Before I watched Nancy Grace's episode, my initial pre-conclusions, if you will, were that, number one, there was a very large set of homicides that took place from 1996 to 2010, and we weren't completely sure who was responsible at the time. This is back in 2021. How many killers were operating, which victims were killed by whom. But over time, we've had the opportunity to explore this case. And also in 2023, there was a major discovery, and that was that a DNA match was linked to an individual named Rex Heuermann, and he was arrested in 2023, this current year, and he is currently awaiting trial, and all types of things are coming out. After the arrest of Rex Heuermann, the first confirmed victim in the Long Island serial killer mystery was identified as Karen Vergata. She was unidentified for decades and simply known as the Fire Island Jane Doe. Now, I think that this is one where I have to just share my pre-conclusions. And that is that I looked into this case and I thought there was one killer. I thought that Shannan Gilbert was not murdered by the Long Island serial killer, and her death was accidental. And I found that that was really quite different than a lot of the other true crime observations that I had made about other cases in the past. Every Monday I do a segment about the Zodiac Killer here on Black Box Online Radio called just that, Zodiac Monday. And you guys know I have talked for hours about multiple killers. Is it possible this and that? Looking at every other possible way for multiple killers. I've even explored that in the Jack the Ripper case. But with the Long Island serial killer mystery, I was like, yeah, I think there's one killer. And also unconfirmed crimes. In the Zodiac case, I mean, people ask me questions all the time. Hey, do you think this person could be a Zodiac victim? My answer is always no, 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 highly unlikely. Jack the Ripper, the same thing. Do you think the Thames Torso murders were committed by Jack the Ripper? No, I don't. But with the Long Island serial killer mystery, I found that I was leaning toward possibilities in that way. For example, Karen Vergata was murdered in 1996. Then we had the murder of the Peaches Jane Doe. She's still unidentified in 97. And then in 2000, Valerie Mack was murdered. And in 2003, Jessica Taylor was murdered. Then there's a roughly 3 or 4 year gap in activity. And the Cherries Jane Doe was murdered in 2007. All of these women were mutilated and dismembered. And I began to really think that the Cherries Jane Doe was a victim of the Long Island serial killer, but she's an unconfirmed victim. That's just another example. Another strong example would be the Asian male Doe. That is simply what we know of him as. Highly likely that he was murdered by the Long Island serial killer. Then in 2007, we have the crimes that Rex Heuermann was charged with. He was charged with the murders of He was charged with the murders of Melissa Bartolome, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. He is the prime suspect in the murder of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. And she was the first victim killed in 2007. Then Melissa Bartolome was murdered. then Megan Waterman, and finally Amber Lynn Costello. By the way, can somebody write something in the chat? I'm not seeing any responses. I don't want to act like I'm ignoring guys. Evie, hey, and here we go. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Evie. Also, in between the murders of Maureen Brainerd Barnes and Melissa Bartolome, and then we have the murders of Megan Waterman and Amberlynn Costello. Right in the middle is the story of Shannan Gilbert. On May 1st of 2010, Shannan Gilbert left Manhattan roughly around midnight, thereabouts, and she went from Manhattan to Long Island to meet a client named Joe Brewer. She was driven to the scene by Michael Pack, who was someone who had regularly done this. Shannan knew him previously. It was not their first time interacting. Then, at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, Shannan Gilbert arrives at Joe Brewer's house. Again, she's working as an escort. He is her client. After that, some series of events happens. And at 3:51 in the morning, Shannan Gilbert makes a 911 call that goes on for 23 minutes, saying all of these frantic things, such as, they're trying to kill me. She says that there are multiple people that are coming after her. In some lines, she says that there's one person. Another time, she says that there are multiple people. But the expression, they are trying to kill me, is used multiple times. Okay, so what on earth was going on? Now, this is the stuff that I think gets really tricky, because people get mad at me for saying this, but I don't like Joe Brewer as a Long Island serial killer suspect, meaning that he had any involvement with any of the crimes, that he had any involvement with Shannan's death, because a lot of people have been very hard on me for saying that. They think that Joe Brewer more or less killed Shannan, and the reason I don't believe that is, if you listen to Shannan's 911 call, which I have here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, I played the whole thing in a previous episode, you can search for it on the channel, she's not afraid of Joe Brewer. Very clearly, she is trying to stay away from her driver, Michael Pack, which is so bizarre. Even in the film Lost Girls, which is based on the book of the same name, they say that makes no sense. For example, line, he should have been the person that she would have been running to if she thought someone was trying to hurt her. But she says that she doesn't want to go to Michael Pack. She wants to stay in Joe Brewer's house. And on the 911 call, Joe Brewer says very clearly he's going to walk upstairs, he's going to leave the door open, and when he comes back down, he wants Shannan gone. He just doesn't like her behavior. And Shannan's saying, no, I want the door closed. She wants to stay in Joe Brewer's house. She is not threatened by him. And Julian is here. Hey, Ned, good morning. I completely agree with your opinion that he murdered the Asian male. His search results revealed that he was looking up Asian male twinks. Oh, yes, and so many things have come out that suggest that Rex Heuermann murdered the Asian male doe for that exact reason. And that is one of the few cases about the Long Island serial killer where I did not do a standalone episode. And if you had asked me a year ago, I would have said no. If you asked me in 2023, I would say yes. I think that Rex Heuermann murdered the Asian male doe. I don't know his name, but... So, what happens to Shannan Gilbert? She's running up and down the houses in Oak Beach, banging on people's doors, saying that she needs help. There's this dark-colored vehicle that's following along, trying to get her over to him, which we almost all can accept as Michael Pack, and he doesn't even deny that. He did a full deposition. Then Shannan disappears. This is another thing that's mentioned in the film Lost Girls. How was she able to be on the phone with 911 for 23 minutes and no police officers arrived? I think it was just a secluded area. But the challenge question was, or the request, would you respond to some new news that was shared on Nancy Grace's YouTube channel as well as her SiriusXM show? And that is some possible pre-Gilgo Beach activity with Rex Heuermann and two victims, Shannan Gilbert and Karen Vergata. And in Nancy Grace's episode, which you can hear on YouTube for free, she tells the story of how a witness has come forward saying that she was a taxi driver, a female taxi driver, who drove to a motel, which they call a motor lodge, and that there was a woman whom she is certain was Shannan Gilbert, and that she interacted with a man that matched Rex Heuermann's description. and that this is all way, way before Shannan went missing, and then ultimately Shannan Gilbert would be found dead in a marsh, but way before. And what this woman is saying, that the story is that Shannan Gilbert goes into the motel room with this guy. He hands her an envelope, and he says it has $1,000 in it. And when he is going to the bathroom, Shannan opened the envelope and saw that it wasn't real money, it was just paper. So then that guy came out of the bathroom. She has to use the bathroom. She locks the doors and calls a taxi company. And then she's just staying in the bathroom. And the taxi showed up and started beeping the horn and flashing the lights. And the man, who was described as just being gigantic, ran out with his hands and arms over his face. By saying that arms over his face, I believe it's something to that effect. Not just his hands, but he's walking like that. And then he gets into a white van. And then he starts to drive away. So, is it possible that Shannan Gilbert met up with Rex Heuermann prior to becoming a victim or a casualty in the Long Island serial killer story? Quite possibly. I don't necessarily think this is much of a bombshell as Nancy Grace made it out to be, because number one, it appears that the taxi driver did not get a clear look at the face, at this man's face. And we have a comment that's come in from Ross. Is that the girl from Little House on the Prairie? No, that was Melissa Gilbert, right? And then she went on to be president of the Screen Actors Guild, right? Okay, but so Shannan is in this motel room. She's able to then leave with the taxi driver, and she's telling the story. And the taxi driver says that she is 100% certain that that was Shannan Gilbert after seeing her photos in the news, as well as being interviewed for 9 hours by law enforcement and Shannan's attorney, John Ray, the attorney for Shannan's family, the Gilbert family, interviewed her as well. Okay, so what it appears is that Rex Heuermann is someone who has a very long history with escorts and sex workers. He has a very long history with paid for play services, and this is something that Nancy Grace was talking about as well. And that is that up until now, we've had the understanding that Rex Heuermann's wife had no idea what was going on, that his family had no idea what was going on. Because when Rex Heuermann was arrested for the Gilgo Beach murders, again, they really have only said that he's charged with 3 and the prime suspect in the 4th from 2007 to 2010. When he was arrested, they were saying he's all by himself. He's doing this on his own. His family had no idea. They were out of state at the time of the murders. And now Nancy Grace was on her show saying that, but it appears the wife was in on this. Those were her words. And I'm like, whoa, now wait a second. Maybe she knew something about him seeing sex workers. Maybe they had somewhat of a swinging lifestyle. I didn't hear a single piece of evidence that said that his wife had anything to do with murders. But let me share something with you guys. And that is that can't even begin to think what his family would have experienced. Because I woke up one morning this year and I had my phone and I just saw a bunch of messages. I'm like, what on earth is going on? I'm half asleep. And they're talking about how there's been an arrest in the Long Island serial killer mystery. And I'm just like, but to think that that could have been your father, or maybe for some people out there, your husband, or your family member, and not just any family member. I mean, we're not talking third cousin 8 times removed, just someone in your immediate nuclear family is a serial killer in one of the most famous mysteries in America. I can't even begin to imagine what the family would have been thinking. And recently on the channel, I had Mike Morford on as a guest, and we were talking about the Golden State Killer. And he was just saying the same thing, that with the family of the Golden State Killer, it's the same story. The family members are also victims, and their lives must have been turned upside down. The family of Rex Heuermann must have their lives turned upside down. And it seems like Rex Heuermann is extremely guilty of some murders because they have DNA evidence, so they say, that can link him to that. But was his wife responsible for any of the crimes? Well, let's look at the next story that was shared in Nancy Grace's episode. And that is that In 1996, Karen Vergata was murdered. Her body was dismembered, her legs were cut off, and her head was decapitated. They found her legs in 1996, and after the discovery of the serial killer graveyard in 2010, they found her skull. They created a composite sketch, and she was unknown, unidentified for years. And ultimately, she was identified as Karen Vergata. Previously, she was known as the Fire Island Jane Doe. The other witnesses come forward and said that she knew Rex Heuermann personally because they had met at a swinging event, that he worked very close by to a swingers club. Exactly, they said 7 or 8 blocks, maybe a 10-minute walk to a club, which had a reputation for swinging. And what happened was that one night, 5 people met up. Rex Heuermann, his wife, a police officer in a narcotics division, the witness, and a woman who matches Karen Vergata's description. 5 people. And I'm not really up to date on my swinging lifestyles. That's really isn't exactly me. I've never really participated in that. But even I could comprehend the concept of being a third wheel or a fifth wheel. And I was like, I mean, the concept of swing is you're supposed to change partners. But if you have 5 people, that's an odd number. I know. Okay, I've watched porn in the past. But that did stand out to me as something weird with the odd number. And it is that Rex Heuermann's wife was pregnant at the time, so that's why they found Karen Vergata, who was a sex worker, and that's why she was brought to the house, because Rex Heuermann's wife did not want to participate in any of the sexual activities, but she knew fully well what her husband was doing. Another witness came forward, and they were telling a story of how Rex Heuermann was a regular client of escorts. Sometimes he would request 2 to come at once. And in one instance, his wife was upstairs, and she actually accused one of the escorts of theft. And that is that I couldn't even believe this. She accused her of stealing an iron and something to iron clothes. And I was just thinking, what? I thought she was going to say money or jewelry. Hey, I think you were trying to take that home and iron your leotard or something like that. I was like, what? No, but apparently the escort didn't even steal the iron. The only reason why that story was shared on Nancy Grace's episode was because they were proposing that Rex Heuermann's wife knew completely about escorts, and she was perhaps participating in the swinging lifestyle. We have a question that's coming in from Evie, who says, what's a girl doing on Fire Island? Do you mean because Fire Island is notoriously famous for being a destination for gay men? Well, that's where her remains were discovered. Because with Karen Vergata, the Fire Island Jane Doe, she is with Rex Heuermann, and there's the witness and the unidentified male with her, and they're about to leave. And they can see some type of altercation happening with Rex Heuermann and this girl who could possibly be Karen Vergata inside the house. And then the girl runs out naked into the yard, and the witness is saying, hey, should we help her? Should we give her a ride? Does she need to get out of here? And the guy says, nah, they're just playing a game. It's just a game. It's fine. And they drive away. Now, was that woman Karen Vergata? I don't know, but I think it's highly possible. I think that sighting is way more likely to be credible than actually seeing Rex Heuermann with Shannan Gilbert at the motel. The sighting of Shannan Gilbert at the motel with a man who resembles Rex Heuermann's description isn't very convincing to me for the following reason. Number 1, the taxi driver didn't see his face. All she really said was that he's a tall, large man. Maybe she saw some other details that came out in the interview. And Ray Grant says, hey, Ray, good morning. It's 8:17 p.m. in the Philippines. We had the time change. I guess you guys had the time change in America, so we are still on the same time here in the Philippines. It's 9:17 now. And Evie says, I must say the Son of Sam case was a lot more interesting when I still believe Maury Terry's fraudulent version of events. I often find that these types of serial killer networks are not always what they're made out to be. But one thing that is possible with the Long Island serial killer mystery is that the police could have had very intense knowledge. According to this witness, who was with Rex Heuermann and possibly Karen Vergata before she died, she said she was attending a swingers event with a narcotics officer, and the Suffolk County Police Department has been accused of an enormous amount of wrongdoings in the Long Island serial killer mystery. They've also been, do I even need to bring up the story of Jimmy the King, James Burke, the bag of sex toys, and all of his weird arrests? Activity going all the way up to the chief of police, malicious activity. And Ross says, oh, you guys talking about Maury Terry and the Satanic Cult? Yeah, Son of Sam. But with the Long Island serial killer, I think it's quite possible that Karen Vergata was with Rex Heuermann. That would make so much sense about how you would have a single serial killer who was operating starting in 96, 97, 2000, 2003, maybe 2007, and for some unknown reason, he stops dismembering the victims. He stops mutilating the victims, and he switches to strangling them. Now, Nancy Grace asked a challenge question to the audience, and that is, how would a serial killer know where to dispose of the bodies if he were unfamiliar with the area, if they were unfamiliar with the area? Because even though lots of serial killers are male, some are female, and also some male serial killers have female accomplices. And she's trying to say that serial killers operate in areas in which they are familiar with. Okay, but as somebody who closely follows true crime cases here on Black Box Online Radio, that's almost not even true. We have all types of exceptions to that rule. We have so many exceptions to that rule, it's almost not even a rule anymore. Serial killers operate in unfamiliar areas all the time. What about the traveling serial killers like Tommy Lynn Sells? What about the traveling serial killers like Joseph Paul Franklin, the coast-to-coast killer and the racist killer, respectively? And also, how is somebody going to dispose of a body? How is somebody going to discard someone's human remains if they're unfamiliar with the area? Secluded places. We see this time and time again, especially in the cases from the American West. I mean, when I did the episode on Valentine Sally, that was her, a name like Jane Doe that was given to her. She has since been identified as Carolyn Eaton. Her body was discarded in the desert of Arizona. Cadence Langley was also discarded in the desert. What about Canada and the Highway of Tears? All kinds of people are buried underneath the soil up there. Secluded areas. That's all you need. And this happens in true crime cases all the time. And Ray Grant has a comment about how Ted Bundy's first move in any area was to familiarize himself with wooded areas nearby. Oh, sure. I'm sure some serial killers are going to be very big on familiarizing themselves with areas. And as I understand, Ray Grant has a book that is going to be coming out soon about Ted Bundy. We're going to have to do some discussions about that in the future if Ray is down for that. And Ray Grant will also be my guest this week for the interview segment that is going to be coming out tomorrow to anyone who's listening live. And you can also just tune in the future to my interview with Ray Grant if you're curious about the Zodiac Killer and all things true crime. You can also hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And now we have a question here from Julian. It says, with the fact that his wife would attend swinger parties with him, I think she needs to be interrogated further, in my opinion. She knew some of the victims too, right? Well, if this story is true, then she did indeed meet Karen Vergata, and she was pregnant, so she didn't want to participate in the sexual activities. That would mean that she knew what was going on with Karen Vergata. She was present when Rex Heuermann was with Karen Vergata. But that is completely contrary to everything else that has been shared about the Long Island serial killer, the Gilgo Beach killer, the Maynardville butcher, because they said that he committed the crimes when his wife and kids were out of town. Now that would mean that he would have had to have committed the first murder when his wife was in town. Possibly, allegedly. We're still trying to make use of everything. And Ray Grant says, Ted Bundy Deconstructed. Hey, Ray, is that going to be the working title for your book on Ted Bundy? And if you have any release date on anything, I would definitely like to know. But serial killers do not always follow patterns of behavior. And some serial killers can be unpredictable. If you go back and listen to the old episodes of Black Box Online Radio from 2019, you'll hear me saying stuff like, "Oh, well, a serial killer starts out by trying different methods, and they find one that works, and then they keep doing that, and they create the pattern of behaviors." No. Again, there's so many exceptions to the rule, it almost doesn't even become a rule anymore, because serial killers will deviate from those patterns all the time, particularly if they think that they're going to be caught. Like, say, for example, a serial killer targets women, but then he gets interrupted by a man, so he murders the man to protect himself. And yeah, all the way back to 1996, that would mean that he was targeting females, but at least one male, the Asian male Doe, maybe even another Latino male that they were discussing, and also black women, white women, Hispanic women. It really doesn't seem like he was paying too much attention to the ethnicity. And as far as patterns go, look, the Long Island serial killer mystery is a very clear example of how the pattern completely breaks and changes. 1996 to possibly 2007, the women are mutilated and dismembered, whereas from 2007 and onwards, the victims are strangled and their bodies are discarded. At least two of them were placed into burlap. And I really have to give credit to Erin Moriarty from 48 Hours for all of her coverage on the Long Island serial killer mystery. And some people do not like shows like Dateline and 48 Hours and even 2020. And going back to the older days, primetime ABC. I mean, I'm sure Ray Grant and some other people remember that one with Diane Sawyer, right? Some people are very critical of these programs because they just say they're mainstream true crime shows and they're just trying to overhype the situation and blow things out of proportion. But Erin Moriarty has shared an enormous amount of coverage for the Long Island serial killer mystery. And even when I go to read up on different stories about the Long Island serial killer, I find news articles that have her name on it all the time. It says by Erin Moriarty. Now, I'm sure she works with a team based on how high profile 48 Hours is, but the timeline that I was just talking about with Shannan Gilbert at the beginning of this episode, I would cite completely as just what I read from Erin Moriarty. Now, Nancy Grace, on the other hand, whom I've been discussing in this episode, I have never been a fan of her. I've never liked her personality. And it's not only because she's loud and overly abrasive, it's because she is a true crime host and she's a former prosecuting attorney. So it's almost as if she chooses a side to play prior to the discussion of the facts, and then she just thinks that someone's guilty and then just zones in on that and tries to build a case for that. But I don't care what Nancy Grace thinks or what anyone else thinks. This is about the facts. This is about the truth, right? That's why it's true crime. Ray Grant has a question. Isn't the prevailing consensus that the list was at least two people? Okay, Ray. Here's what happened. For the longest time, I thought there was one killer, right? And then, when I got the news that Rex Heuermann was arrested, we're like, the Long Island serial killer mystery has been solved, right? Wrong. Because he was only charged with 3 murders, and one has been attributed to him, the Gilgo 4. So then everybody's just thinking, now wait a second. Who was responsible for the murders from 1996 to 2003 of Karen Vergata, the Peaches Jane Doe, of Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor? Who was responsible for that? Does that mean that there are 2 killers? We simply don't know. And I remember the Catch Long Island serial killer page, which is called Catch List, available on Instagram, wrote the same thing, saying it's almost as if you could just celebrate the case has been solved. No, it hasn't. And there's a page on Facebook called Remembering Jessica Taylor, whom I contacted after the arrest of Rex Heuermann for a comment for Black Box Online Radio. And I was like, hey, do you have anything to say? And that person said, more or less, no. It doesn't appear that Rex Heuermann has been charged with the murder of Jessica Taylor. And that page is called Remembering Jessica Taylor, but it does follow the Long Island serial killer mystery as a whole. And that person's just like, well, no, he hasn't been charged with those crimes. But as the evidence is beginning to unfold, it becomes quite possible that maybe there was one killer. As far as the consensus that the list was at least 2 people, I don't think everybody agreed with that, but it was widely discussed and widely entertained. Now, the thing that I said I want to sneak into every episode of Black Box Online Radio was that in 2010, they made the discovery of the serial killer graveyard, while they were looking for Shannan Gilbert. Shannan Gilbert goes missing after her bizarre encounter with Joe Brewer. As I said, she's running up and down. She's on the phone with 911. She goes missing, and ultimately she's found dead in the marsh. But while they were searching for Shannan Gilbert, they found the serial killer graveyard that had all of these dead bodies. But prior to that, the authorities knew completely well that a serial killer was operating in the area. They called the person the Manorville Butcher. That's what I say in all of the episodes. But I found some other news articles that talk about how the concept of the Manorville Butcher was actually involving other people on Long Island too. Like there were some male victims that they thought was responsible. There were some male victims that they thought were the work of a single serial killer. Like somebody had murdered Valerie Mack and Jessica Taylor, as well as these other male victims. So it's a little bit different. But they knew about Valerie Mack. They knew about Jessica Taylor. They knew about the Peaches Jane Doe. They knew about the Fire Island Jane Doe. The authorities knew that a serial killer was operating. They just didn't know to this extent. And they didn't know to this level. So a lot of people thought, well, hey, the victims from 1996 to 2007, counting the Cherries Jane Doe, were mutilated and dismembered. The victims from 2007 to 2010 were not mutilated and dismembered. They're like, well, that's two killers. And why on earth would there be two killers using the same dumping ground? Two killers dumping their bodies in the same areas, like one in the 90s and early 2000s, one in the later 2000s? What are the chances of that? Secluded areas. When you look at a map of Long Island, you'll see that more or less you would be driving down that parkway and someone would have to make a right turn onto the road near Gilgo Beach, and it's just a secluded piece of land. Same thing about how can a serial killer discard a body in an area that he's not familiar with? Secluded areas. As close to the middle of nowhere as you're going to get, perhaps. And, to answer that question, I think we're still waiting for the results. Who committed the murders of the women in the late 90s and early 2000s? And we're just going to have to wait and see where that, and also see how this trial is going to play out. But as far as Shannan Gilbert goes, Nancy Grace asked a challenge question. How did Shannan Gilbert die? If she had not been a victim of a serial killer, how did she die? And I have to give a shout out to Studio Steph, who followed Black Box Online Radio and said, Shannan Gilbert went missing in May of 2010, in May on Long Island. You cannot freeze to death outside when it's May and it's 70 degrees out. Not to mention, she went missing in the early AM hours. I said that her phone call came at 3:51 in the morning. Sunrise would have come up. There's no possible way that she would have frozen to death. I agree. For a while, I had thought that Shannan Gilbert drowned in the marsh, and somebody wrote into the channel saying that they had contacted a hydrologist. They follow the Long Island serial killer case. They contacted a hydrologist who said that would have been impossible because of the water levels in the marsh. I wasn't able to evaluate their findings, so I'm not sure about that. But how would Shannan Gilbert be able to pass away? Nancy Grace asked this challenge question. Number one, dehydration. Somebody gets lost in the marsh. Maybe she is experiencing some very intense fits of mania. Maybe she is experiencing some type of disorientation and she's gone for 3-4 days. Yes, she could die from dehydration because all the water that would have been around her would have been salt water, and that's just a possibility. That's just something that I've thought about from time to time. Also, we have to bear in mind shock, maybe some type of cardiac arrest. Shannan Gilbert was known to use drugs such as ecstasy and marijuana. She had bipolar disorder. And let's just go through this real fast. In case you haven't heard some of the previous episodes on this channel about Shannan Gilbert and the Long Island serial killer, the reasons why the authorities believe that Shannan Gilbert was not killed by the Long Island serial killer were that, number one, her body was found on the opposite side of the parkway than the other victims, which is the north side. The other victims would be on the south side. And Shannan Gilbert also made that 23-minute 911 call, and the authorities stated that with the victims, Maureen Brainerd Barnes and Amberlynn Costello and Megan Waterman and Melissa Bartolome, None of them were able to make phone calls prior to their murders. Even with Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, there was no recorded evidence that they were able to make phone calls. With the Peaches Jane Doe and the Cherries Jane Doe, they're still unidentified, so who knows, but they weren't able to have access to their phones. That's another thing that is different. And I've always stated that as soon as I started looking into the Long Island serial killer case, I don't believe that Shannan was killed by the Long Island serial killer. I don't believe that she was killed by Rex Heuermann. It's possible, but I still don't believe so. Ray Grant says, Erin also works for a major news network, so she has more varying content to choose from than Nancy Grace. I'm referring to Erin Moriarty with CBS, whereas Nancy Grace was on her own YouTube channel, but she was talking about how she airs the show on Sirius XM. I'm not sure if she's still on HLN now. I used to just watch her in the past and go absolutely kind of like nails on the chalkboard when you're listening to her voice talk. And also because Nancy Grace really blew the Casey Anthony story out of the water, and I don't mean that in a good way. I mean, like, literally blew it out of the water because she's smashing the water levels and making too many waves. She got my attention with that, but she sensationalized the Casey Anthony story back in 2011 to no end, and I don't think that that's an outrageous statement. Jerome is here, the French Wrecking Crew. Hello, Ned. Hello, everybody. Sorry to be late. I will watch the replay. Hey, thank you so much, Jerome. And this weekend, I'm going to head over to your channel and watch some of the Zodiac Killer documentaries that you have uploaded. And if anybody would like to follow some more true crime content, Jerome has uploaded a lot of things onto his YouTube channel. The French Wrecking Crew. Yes, they're in English, but with French subtitles. And if you are ever at a shortage of true crime content, but YouTube has plenty of that. So overall, I've always had my doubts that Shannan was not killed by the Long Island serial killer. But this is not a contest. There's no prize for me at the end. If I'm wrong, then I will just accept that. Like I said, I thought there was one killer. If it turns out there was two killers, I would accept that. If it turns out that Shannan's death wasn't the result of getting disoriented in a marsh, I would accept that. But I think it was Tyler Grover, another longtime listener to Black Box Online Radio, who wrote into the channel and said, what kind of coincidence would it be that Shannan Gilbert is a sex worker, goes to meet a client on Long Island, runs away, and she's found dead across the road from a serial killer graveyard, but she was not killed by the serial killer? What kind of coincidence would that be? Anything's possible, right? And the only way that I could justify that or reconcile that would be that there's just a high frequency of escorts coming in to Long Island. There's a high frequency of escorts coming in to Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach. And I mean, think about what we said earlier about Rex Heuermann, that he was known to use escorts. He would order them two at a time or call them two at a time. He's probably not the only one. And I mean, if there are numerous escorts coming into these communities, then it wouldn't be so surprising that one of them ran away and was the victim of a different accident, and then it just so happened that the serial killer graveyard was on the other side of the road. Jerome says, makes no sense. Hey, Jerome, what exactly do you mean with that? Like, which part of the story doesn't make sense? You mean Shannan Gilbert's issues or with the Long Island serial killer? And at this time, you guys mostly have heard all of my observations about that, and I'd like to open the floor to any other true crime topics that you guys are curious about. But I begin to notice that, we have one from Ray Grant that says, I'm a fan of Morph, but he's the opposite of Nancy Grace. He's almost too low-key. He was set up to debate Horan years ago and let Horan talk without interruption. You're talking about Morph's debate. What was that called on? Oh, what was the name of that podcast? It was one that's been taken down. I've never been able to listen to that. And to the listeners, he's talking about Mike Morford and Thomas Henry Horan, who follow the Zodiac Killer mystery. And hey, Ray, what was the name of that podcast? I mean, I might even have to Google that because it's going to be bothering me until the end of time. Oh, it was on House of Mystery. So there was a recent debate that took place on Planet X Filmworks between Thomas Henry Horan, the supporter of the Zodiac hoax theory, and Druser, also known as Andrew Gray. And there was a debate that happened several years ago. Was that in 2014 even, or something like that? And Mike Morford of ZodiacKillersite.com and ZodiacKiller.net was debating Thomas Henry Horan. And Horan he's definitely a heavy hitter. He's definitely someone who will go in different directions. And I think that it's definitely a challenge to even get him focused. I could tell the moderator of that one, Ross from Planet X Filmworks, was having some trouble. And Evie says, Horan versus Morph. I wish I hadn't missed that. Well, Jerome says, Ned, did you see the latest Zodcast? No, I didn't, Jerome. What happened on the latest Zodcast? I'm going to Google that one thing, though, about Michael Morford versus Thomas Horan debate. Let's see. Generation Y podcast. Ray Grant says, Thomas Horan never shuts up if you let him. But Ray Grant, would you be down for participating in a debate with Thomas Henry Horan? I think that if anybody should, it should be you. If anybody would be a strong challenger or opponent. And I'm always down to go on Planet X Filmworks to participate in the Zodiac Killer debate files because, why not, right? But Ross simply said, if somebody challenges me, I would go on the show. Just no one has as of now. And something else, though. Let's talk about the Long Island serial killer, Zodiac, any of these unsolved mysteries. If people are going to be debating the facts in a true crime case, I think it's so much better if, number one, both sides make what their narrative is known to the audience. Where there is someone just saying, I don't have a Zodiac suspect. No, not acceptable. Because that's just going to turn into, well, maybe, I guess, I don't know. It's an unsolved case. Long Island serial killer, Jack the Ripper, Zodiac killer. You can always play that card. So, what you would have to do is at least make a claim that you are going to defend. Now, Ray Grant was talking about how some people are monopolizing the talking time. Number two, time limits. This happens all the time in debates online. When you're watching the debates about politics and religion and social issues, lots of them have time limits where you just say 4 minutes uninterrupted and you can have an exchange. If someone starts interrupting, the moderator can cut their mic. That's how you get around that. Ray Grant says, the only downside of debating Horan is that you have to read his books, but let me know when you want to debate them. How exactly do you mean, Ray? I've read Thomas Horan's books. You mean that you don't want to read them because you don't think they're going to be high value or something? Jerome says, it was a great episode with music and debate about the Zodiac. Oh, no, I didn't know Drew was on the Zodcast, was doing a debate series. Planet X Filmworks seems like it's going to have something good going with the Zodiac Killer debate files. And I think, though, by making a stance very clear, though, that you will be defending something. Because if somebody is just going to say that I don't have a suspect, I don't have a theory, anything's possible, that creates what's called the verbal illusion, where they can just talk the other person in circles for hours and hours and wait for them to make a mistake and like, aha, you made a mistake. I win. Like, but you haven't proven anything. You made a mistake. I win. I think that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac. You made a mistake. I win. Or you think that there's only one killer in the Long Island serial killer case and not multiple killers. You made a mistake. I win. When someone is not committed to any theory, they should at least defend a set of ideas or a platform. And Ray says, I've read some of early Horan, but his thesis keeps changing. I would go on, absolutely. And I used to follow the Stones Unturned podcast rather closely, his show. I would gladly discuss some of those things on any channel. Ross says, this is Ross Dog's Broken Spirit, by the way, not Ross Gerasi. He says, what do you make of Arthur Lee Allen's alibi of the Berryessa attack? Kind of suspicious, if you ask me. I was just discussing this with Mike Rodelli when he said that Arthur Lee Allen is somebody who made up a bunch of crap and said weird things and was trolling the police and acting like a jerk because he knew he wasn't the Zodiac and he knew he wouldn't get arrested because they didn't have the physical evidence. I more or less agree. Evie says, yes, because if you haven't read them, he can always claim you're ignorant of his facts. Not only have I read Thomas Henry Horan's book, I did 2 book discussions on it. I did one with the old-fashioned black box recording, and I polled you guys in the comments section about what would you like to hear about for my next multi-part discussion, and people voted for The Myth of the Zodiac Killer. So I did one that had images on the screen and their playlists, and I mean, yes, okay, yes, I've read his stuff. Jerome says, I have watched all of the videos of Ray Grant. He knows his stuff, even if I disagree with the suspects. You know what, Jerome? Tom Boyd of ZodiacKiller.com made the statement that if anybody should debate the facts of the case, it should be Ray Grant. Yes, absolutely. And I hope that Ray is going to maybe go on Planet X Filmworks. But I think, though, that Ray, you said you were not interested in participating in the Zodiac Killer debate files on Planet X Filmworks. Was that right? And Ray Grant says, you're talking about the accuracy in media, a trick of focusing one flaw in your argument and ignoring the rest. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. It's almost like argumentative trickery, or it's not getting to the heart of the issue. Let's say, if you and I wanted to debate the facts about Shannan Gilbert and say whether or not she was killed by a serial killer or was an accidental death, and if your stance is just, I don't know, anything's possible, then you can't lose. You just have to talk the other person into making a mistake and then act like you've won. Now, we have from Evie. He has a question for Ray Grant. So your research was initially based on Gareth Penn's theory, roughly. And Ray Grant says, most of my research is Penn and O'Hare. Ray Grant's Zodiac Killer theory is that, yes, indeed, Gareth Penn, the author of Time 17, was more or less the Zodiac Killer's publicist. Michael O'Hare committed the murders. Gareth Penn wrote about them. And there were 2 additional participants, Berta Margulies and Hugh Penn. And some people refer to it as the parents' theory, although I've never heard Ray Grant say that specifically. And Evie says, you should debate Ray. But, like, Ray and I had the opportunity to correspond a little bit about that once, because I was at one time looking at hosting debates on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. And I think, though, that did you express something that was more or less, I'm asking Ray this, more or less to the effect of, you thought that people wouldn't focus on the debate, or that they wouldn't accept your challenges, or if you're going to, like, ask a question, they're just going to ignore it, and then they're going to dismiss certain things. Okay, Ray says he will debate anyone, including Thomas Henry Hoare, on Planet X Filmworks. Oh, right, yes. Yes, great, Ray, but think about what I said, though, with the time limits, kind of like make that request 4 minutes uninterrupted, so then you can go back and forth. And there's also something else that needs to be said, and that relates to how I think it would be an excellent debate between Thomas Horan and Ray Grant, because both of them talk about how there are multiple participants in the Zodiac Killer mystery. As I said, Ray Grant has 4 people that he calls the 4 Zodiacs. Thomas Henry Horan also says that there were multiple people involved. And so people who have a lot of similarity at a base level, but then they go in completely different directions, that would be something that would be a beneficial discussion. The French Wrecking Crew says, Ray, you're welcome on my channel anytime to debate about the Zodiac. I have a lot of respect for your work. Nice, Jerome. Sure, yes. Somebody should arrange that one, because there are going to be some interpretations of the case that a lot of people aren't going to agree with. I'm not going to agree with everything. And I think, though, that a debate should also have things like opening statements. People can be like, oh, okay, this is what I think. These are the points that I genuinely believe. And with true crime, no devil's advocate. No just kind of like testing the waters. Say what you genuinely think. And it's not even something like a political debate where I've just chosen a side, so I'm just going to argue that side. I don't think that that is appropriate in the true crime world. Say what you genuinely think about the case. Make a clear case for something, take a strong stance on something, and then that's the side that you're going to defend because you think that it's true. Now, with something such as a true crime debate, we would also have to really look at how people will respond to the points. We're just talking about that, right? And the moderator needs to jump in and just be like, that's not relevant. Whereas in the last debate, it starts out by talking about the Zodiac Killer and then going off on a tangent about the Golden State Killer. Neither of the participants thought that the Golden State Killer was the Zodiac. that is a real theory out there by Ann Penn, but I don't even think that. So, and we have a comment from Evie says, excellent, we need high-quality discussions. Ray Grant says, the positive about live debate is that you can't ignore arguments like on a message board. Yeah. Message boards, the comment sections on YouTube, and, I think that as far as discussing ideas on YouTube go, a lot of people have called me out because they don't think I'm tough enough on people. A lot of people have called me out because I don't highlight ridiculousness in a lot of these true crime theorists. And maybe I do need to be tougher on that, but also, I've said I will discuss anybody's theory. But if I think the person is genuine, I'll discuss their theory, and I'm not going to just try and embarrass them or just trash talk them. But in something like a true crime debate, it would be completely appropriate to strongly challenge somebody and not just try and understand it from their point of view. When I did the Zodiac Killer interview with the Expert series on the Zodiac Killer channel, that's mostly what that was. Yes, I'm asking challenge questions, but it's really just about getting a greater understanding of what the theorist thinks. It's really just about getting some clarity on their points. Whereas with a debate, you want to do the exact opposite. You want to show all of the reasons why that they're wrong. And maybe in the future we can do something like a call-in show right now where people can just ask their challenge questions, so to speak. And Tinsel TQ says, no need to be unnecessarily combative in an interview. Absolutely. And even when I get combative with people in the comment section here on YouTube, some people are just like, they think that it's like rude or something. And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. If some people are just spreading like pure misinformation or saying things that are untrue and unsubstantiated, yes, I do call them out and I just say, that's not right at all. Some people don't even like that. And the French Wrecking Crew says, I agree 100% with you. Ray Grant says, I have to remove the comments, not because I'm trying to silence people, because I don't want the discussion to be hijacked. Well, if anybody is curious about the Zodiac Killer mystery, Ray Grant does have at least 5 parts now on his channel. You have a 5-part video series, right, talking about the murder of Sherry Jo Bates from 1966, about the Lake Herman Road murders. Can't believe it took me a while to remember that. Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and Ray Grant just released his 5th video on Presidio Heights. And Ray, out of curiosity, do you have a bigger plan to keep the series going? You're going to be talking about some other cases, like maybe Kathleen Johns or Donna Lass or any of the other unconfirmed Zodiac crimes. So, other than that, I mean, this episode is going to be winding down a little bit shorter, but thank you to everyone who tuned in from the beginning, listening to things about the Long Island serial killer and the death of Shannan Gilbert. And to conclude, I want to be very clear that I still have to stand by my original statement that maybe the evidence will point toward a single killer in the Long Island serial killer case. I was really challenged a lot when they said they were only charging Rex Heuermann with 3 or 4 murders of the Gilgo 4. And he was just referred to as the Gilgo Beach killer, not the Long Island serial killer in the early stages of the media. But we might see new evidence that will reveal that he did commit the earlier crimes. Cat Daddy Steve, good morning. And, the French Wrecking Crew says, Ned, if Mr. Grant is okay with that, could you please introduce myself to him? Absolutely, I'll pass on the contact info. And Jerome can host some true crime debates on the French Wrecking Crew. But as far as the evidence, I still have to make the claim that Shannan Gilbert, in my mind, was not murdered by the Long Island serial killer or Rex Heuermann. I don't think it's a very credible sighting that somebody witnessed a man matching Rex Heuermann's description when they picked Shannan Gilbert up from a motel. If they didn't see his face and they just said he's a really big guy. Can I say something, though, about this? I know I said this was winding down, but Shannan Gilbert is in a motel room with somebody who might have been the Long Island serial killer, maybe Rex Heuermann, and he gave her an envelope that was filled with paper instead of money. Now, does that suggest that he wasn't trying to murder her? I don't know. Because I was thinking that A real killer would have given her a real $1,000, and then he would have just murdered her and taken the money back. That almost sounded like he was trying to scam her, like he's trying to be with her, and then he's trying to just give her fake money. That's my immediate first instinct, but I have no idea. I mean, like, I'm not a psychic or something like that. And yes, Ray Grant has 5 videos on his channel if you want more true crime discussions. Tinsel TQ has a question. Ned, are there any other current cases that have piqued your interest in particular? I would love to do a larger discussion on the death of David Carradine, because David Carradine was found dead in 2009 in a hotel in Thailand. David Carradine, the actor from Kill Bill and Kung Fu, and he's appeared in numerous other films and works as an actor. He was found dead. And I think that there's a very high chance that foul play was involved. And to you guys who follow the case, who follow true crime very closely and follow Black Box Online Radio very closely, know that I'm a huge skeptic. I mean, anytime someone's coming at me with a conspiracy theory, I'm just thinking that, no, that's just a wild conspiracy theory. But in this case, I think that it might be a conspiracy theory that's going to turn out to be true. Now, there have been some requests to get back to the Kennedy assassination. I've done 6 or 7 episodes on the Kennedy assassination, talking about conspiracy theories, right? So that's definitely piqued my interest. And there are just countless other true crime cases that I've talked about in the past. Like, I've done an old Black Box recording back in 2019, 2020, and all of a sudden it gets a comment and somebody's saying something like, oh, I was following along with your episode, and they just share something new, and that pulls me back in. Tinsel TQ. First, Evie says David Carradine died of autoerotic asphyxiation, but then Evie, why was there a footprint of an unidentified individual found on David's bed, like someone had tried to leave the hotel room quickly and stepped on the fabric on the bed? And also, his ex-wife Marina Anderson stated that David Carradine never did autoerotic asphyxiation. He did asphyxiation, but only with partners, not autoerotic, meaning he's doing it to himself. These are the clues that point toward signs of foul play. And you can say, like, oh, well, maybe somebody tried something. Well, how do you explain, the evidence of someone else in his hotel room? Evie says perhaps the Mossad got JFK. That was the request. Back in 2020, somebody wrote in saying, Ned, can you do a multi-part series on the Mossad's involvement in the Kennedy assassination? I said, yes. I listen to people, I do requests, and I did that. They're old podcast recordings. They're just one image on the screen. It's kind of like a still image. But if anybody would like to listen to that, I went down the rabbit hole of Michael Collins Piper, talking about how pro-Israel elements of the CIA and pro-Israel elements of organized crime conspired together to have JFK murdered. It's an exploration, not an endorsement. And Steve, I finally made it to a live stream. Ah, yes, Steve. Thank you so much for tuning in. Sure. And Evie says, oh, yes, Ned, I'm completely open to theories and whatever the evidence shows. And the French Wrecking Crew says, the JFK assassination is my stuff. It was the first case that I was interested in. I did the multi-part series on the Mossad and JFK, but I need to explore some more conventional narratives. I need to look at more of the Russian involvement, because was it on the debate files? Was it on the Zodiac Killer debate files when Thomas Horan was talking about Lee Harvey Oswald being indoctrinated or brainwashed in Russia or something like that? It was Thomas Horan, actually, who said that if anybody is going to say that Lee Harvey Oswald was a puppet of the CIA or brainwashed by the CIA, you could make just as strong of a case that he was brainwashed by the KGB or manipulated by the KGB. That's the stuff I got to explore. Let's find out, because this is why I like talking about far out theories. People are like, why aren't you calling out this person for their ridiculousness? I want to explore, find the truth, what is actually happening. You talk about someone's weird true crime theory. Well, if it's easily disproven, disprove it. I mean, that would be something. Well, I don't really see a lot of it in the true crime world, because with a lot of true crime channels on YouTube, what you see is some people retell the facts. There'll be like a 2-hour episode from a famous true crime YouTuber, the same narrative that you can get anywhere online. And then wait, At the very end, there's like 2 minutes of opinion. Doesn't get anywhere. And then there are the other people out there who are like wannabe Alex Joneses who are just kind of like screaming and stuff. And they don't get to the heart of the issue either because they're just talking in circles. So we definitely need more explorations. Now, Tinsel TQ says, yes, Lee Harvey Oswald spoke Russian and he had traveled there. Absolutely, yes. And the French Wrecking Crew says, I've been studying the case for 30 years and I don't see the end. Well, the Zodiac Killer case isn't doing much better either. For JFK research, I go to Bill Simpic, Chuck Ocelli, and Joseph McBride. Hey, Evie, thank you for that. Oh, and Tinsel says the audio was cutting. By the way, is anybody else experiencing some issues with the audio? And, Evie says that you think that the Mossad killed David Carradine. Well, I'd have to look into that and maybe find some reasons as to why. As of now, I mean, when I said foul play, it would be more like there was an additional participant that maybe accidentally killed him and just ran away. That should be a simpler theory that I would explore. Ned is freezing up, which is funny considering how hot it is over there. All right, well, I'm going to write something here in the chat. Hey, sorry if it is freezing. Can you guys still hear me? I've misspelled the word still or something. Nah, sign language isn't working too well, Ray. This kind of comes out all blurry. Can you unplug your mic in again? The audio is just cutting in and out.